بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده تعالى ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن دعا بدعوته واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا. فيا عباد الله ويا معشر المسلمين، الله سبحانه وتعالى يقول في الكتاب الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا. I start in the name of God, Allah, to whom all praise is worthy. And I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except this one God that we refer to by the name of Allah. And I also bear witness that Muhammad is a messenger and a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who is guided by Allah is guided aright. And the one who has been left to go astray has no other guidance except the guidance of God. The human being, the human race, we are beings that like to move around. We like to explore. We like to go to new places and new lands. And wherever people have gone, they have tried to leave their mark behind. They have tried to leave a legacy of some type. So the human being by nature is a very curious being. And this curiosity of the human being took the human being far across the globe, across the oceans, to all parts of the globe. And as you talk to Muslims and other North Americans, whether it is in the United States and Canada, on the legacy and the history of Muslims in this continent, hardly anyone seems to know enough of the legacy of Islam in this country. But we know from historical narratives, books that have been written, other forms of literature, the oral tradition as well, and many other pieces of archaeology and anthropology, that over a period of 7 centuries, Muslims have tried to pave a way for this country. It's a story that we need to share between ourselves and others, whether they be Muslim or not. How Muslims have also been a part of the fabric of this country. How they've helped to build this country from the scratch. Today's American Muslims who came in the last 30, 40 years, the more recent immigrants, and the first generation and the second generation Muslims, these are not the ones who have been here or who came here first. Since the 12th century, and more so in the 16th through the 18th century, millions of Muslims were brought against their own free will. Books that have been written by scholars now say that during that time period, during the very ugly period of the slave trade, over 30% of those that crossed the ocean to come into this country were West African Muslims. And before the slave trade, which also brought millions of Africans, thousands as we know, during the slave trade, but before that, there was also other Muslims who also came to this land. So today we're going to look at the pre-Columbus time, with the evidence that is there, and a little bit about some of the Africans and the influence of the West African literate society here in the United States. Many of these we know were robbed of their names. Their religion was taken away from them. Their language and identity, and a new identity was given to them. Once a free people, they were now made into slaves to work in plantations. They are suffering during ocean voyages on the Caribbean islands, such as the Garifuna people that we keep on reading about. And upon arrival on the mainland, this is all well known to historians. Today I want to answer and address the question of the exploring and the understanding of the roots of Islam in the United States, and to follow the legacy of Muslims in this country. We know several factors contributed to the success of explorers who came to this country from West Africa and from other parts of the Muslim world. First of all, there was that message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. أَوَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Don't you travel the earth and see what happened to nations before you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inviting us to travel the earth, to see what happened to nations before us. And then there is the call of our beloved Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, to whom be peace. When in his last sermon, he charged the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, and by extension all of us, to take this message to the rest of the humanity. And the Sahaba understood this call. They left the Hijaz, and we are told after the death of the Prophet, to whom be peace, his followers, the majority of them, had left the region of Mecca and Medina, and with them went the Islam to different parts of the Muslim world. Islam started moving northwards, and here it flourished and established an extremely literate society. By the 700s, the year 711, we know that is the year that Tariq crosses the Strait of Gibraltar between North Africa, what is existing Morocco today, and crosses on to the Iberian Peninsula. And that would start now a literate culture that extended over a period of 700 years in the Iberian Peninsula. What we know now is Al-Andalus. But before Al-Andalus, before Muslim Spain, they also went into other parts of Africa, Muslims. They went to East Africa, as they did to Northern Africa. And eventually they reached the Sub-Saharan Africa. There we know of the centers of learning that flourished. The famous desert libraries of Africa, if you haven't heard of them, that have thousands of manuscripts still existing. The desert libraries of Mali in West Africa. So during this development of the golden years of Islam, where literacy took off, Muslims were also inventors, because that progress in knowledge meant progress in different disciplines of life, one of which was discovery and invention. And so we know of the astrolabe. The astrolabe, this instrument that is very ancient astronomical computer for solving problems related to time and position, the position of the sun and the stars in the sky. And the astrolabe was heavily used by the Muslim world. And by the year 800, it was introduced into Europe, and it continued to be used in Europe before it was improved for 400 years. Go to the Museum of Islamic Culture in Sharjah, United Arab Emirates. Don't just go shopping in Dubai. Don't just go shopping. Go to the museum in Sharjah, where artifacts like those have been collected by the ruler of Sharjah. In the museum, a large museum that has preserved these artifacts from across the world, where Muslims clearly will see the astrolabe and its variations that Muslims used. So this allowed Muslims to be explorers. They were also merchants at the same time. They were scholars of knowledge, because if you look at the night sky, and if you look at the names of stars today, you will see that all the ancient names that have been preserved until today, over 90% of these names have an Arabic root to them. Look at the constellations and you will see this, the names of the stars. So they started to map the night sky. They started correcting the position of the sun and the moon tables. Together with that, they were masters of geography. So those who questioned that Muslims were unable to do this, they were unable to explore the world, they were masters of geography. In the year 1138, Roger II, king of Sicily, called upon a distinguished Muslim geographer, scholar of his time, from North Africa, who created the first and the most accurate scientific map of the known world at that time. This was the geographer Al-Idrisi. In preparing his work, we are told that he recruited 12 other geographers, 10 of whom were Muslims. And he wrote a book known as Kitab al-Rujari, Al-Kitab al-Rujari, the Book of Rogers. And it is a collection of maps. So we know Muslims were master geographers of their time. And the reason behind this is very simple. What drove these fields of geography and exploration and travel and so on is simply economics. The Muslim world was unified by a flourishing long-distance commerce, as well as by a religion and culture. Muslim merchant pilgrims, as they made their journey to Mecca, where every Muslim is supposed to go once in a lifetime, they also created what is known as road books. These were not just maps. They were maps mixed with information about cities, states, and states. At this and this city, you'll get this and that. You'll get this facility. This is where you can shop for this. This is where you can trade for such an item. This is where you can buy a particular product. The Muslim world at the time, led by geographers like Al-Idrisi. And so we know one of the places that also Muslims went was the Atlantic and the Pacific. And contrary to a little bit of knowledge that we know about Muslims and their presence in this part of the world, Muslims went into the Pacific Ocean during the Al-Amawiyyun, the Umayyad dynasty that ruled the Iberian Peninsula. Within 100 years after the death of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, to whom be peace, they went into a region and they found a group of islands that had a lot of wind. And they called these islands Juzu al-Hawa, the islands of winds. And we know from this name, there could be other origins of this name. I've been to Hawaii before, and I've seen this phenomena where a group of islands, there's a lot of winds in those islands. And from that came Hawaii. And they started to map the Panama area and the Hudson Bay. And so they traveled to parts of the world that you and I might not be aware of. But we recognize that the dark ages of Europe were the dark ages of Europe. Those were not the dark ages of the Muslim cultures and civilizations across the world. Those were the golden times and the golden age of Islam. Between 8 to the 1400 year, Muslims started developing all sorts of disciplines. Our natural ability to think of direction, because wherever you are, turn your head towards Masjid al-Haram, turn your head towards Mecca, turn your face and face Mecca, wherever you are. So wherever you are, you have a sense of direction. Where is this region in the world in relation to where I am? Is it south? Is it northeast? We have a sense of this direction. That is why I travel the earth and see what other cultures have left behind. A Harvard University scholar by the name of Barry Fell, in his book called Saga America, The evidence involving writings found on a bedrock in Nevada and elsewhere by Berry Fell, the 8th century map that we're talking about. You might be able to get this book in the library, it's out of print, but many people have this book. Berry Fell found the writings of many different people in America in pictographs, in caves, on rocks, in different parts of America. A type of scribbling, a type of native language that first they thought it was the native people of the United States. But Berry Fell had suspected that it was more than that. And he took this evidence and he went to the language scholars of Libya at that time, together with UNESCO, this United Nations body that deals with science and culture. And together when they brought these scholars, they found that it was an old Libyan script, Kufic Arabic. Anthropologists have proven now that the Mandinkans under the rule of Mansa Musa in West Africa explored many parts of North America via the Mississippi and other river systems at Four Corners in Arizona. Writings show that they brought elephants from Africa to the region. So Berry Fell is narrating all this, and he's talking about this experience and the engraving they find in Nevada, such as the one that says Ismullah, the name of Allah, Muhammad Nabiullah, Muhammad the servant or the prophet of Allah. These statements, Shaitan the fountain of lies, on bedrocks. So Dr. Fell and others discovered the existence also of Muslim schools in Nevada that was using an education system, a very literate system, in Colorado, in New Mexico, in Indiana, dating it back between the years 700 and 800, engravings of different types. And the language of instruction was North African Arabic, written in the old Kufic style. And he found that the instruction and the material that they used to teach ranged from arithmetic to religion, from history to geography, from mathematics to sea navigation. They found designs on clothing and tattoos on faces, a number of cultural realities that were similar to the cultural realities of Northern Africa. My brothers and sisters in Islam, Al-Idrisi, the geographer, in the 12th century in his geography book, he writes about the journey of Al-Mugharaba, the seafaring North African Andalusians, who went into the ocean, found a set of islands, and in there they were captured, sent to the king. The king speaks to them in the Arabic language they narrate and explains to them how to get back to their original location. And this is back in the 12th century. He told them about their position, their geographical position, and how to get back. But the most startling evidence comes from a report from Al-Umari. This is a geography book that shows the journey of different people throughout the world of his time. And he narrates a journey of the king of West Africa known as Mansa Musa, a West African ruler who at the year 1234, he's traveling across North Africa going to Hajj. He's going to Hajj at that time. And usually the rulers at that time, when they went to Hajj, they took so much wealth and they took so many people with them. He's traveling with an entourage of 70,000 people. And he says in his book that each country that he goes in, he left so much gold that it actually changed the economy of the country that he traveled through. And so he asks him, from where do you get so much power and authority? So much wealth? How do you get all this? And he says, I'm from a line of rulers. My ancestors were all rulers. And my predecessor sent 2,000 vessels across the ocean of darkness, which is what they were called the Atlantic at that time. 2,000 of those vessels. So you see, these are the Mandinka that here in America we refer to as the Mandingo, who came here. They were Muslims from the empires of Mali and Songhai and other places. They crossed the coast into West Africa, followed the currents of the time. You know, when they suspected that this cannot be true, the National Geographic funded a program. And they wanted to prove that it was possible to create a vessel out of local wood from that part of the world. And a Scandinavian man was given this job, and he created a vessel out of papyrus. He showed that you can cross the Atlantic with a boat made of indigenous African material, because he did it, and the National Geographic showed that. Ian van Sertima, the man who wrote a lot of books about the presence of Africans in South and North America. In his book, where he says they came before Columbus, he shows the pieces of evidence that are so dramatic, superbly detailing documentation of the presence and the legacy of Africans in ancient America. Looking at navigation, shipbuilding, cultural ideology, cultural analogies between the Native Americans and Africans, transportation of plants and animals that did not exist in this part of the world, that we know now from botanical studies and from other biological studies, their origin is Africa. They were never found in South America. So he documents all this, and he builds a pyramid of evidence to support the claim of African presence in the New World before Columbus. So the Mandinka Muslims went across, and their writings were found on the Amazon, talking about their journeys, how they went along the Amazon into Central America and the southwest of the United States. Leo Weiner, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, another Harvard scholar, he also shows proof that African Muslims came into the United States and were actually in the southwest of the United States. There were mounds that they found showing elephants with writings saying the desert is hot and the birds are numerous and the elephants are tired. They shipped elephants across the Atlantic. You can imagine the kind of vessels they were building. The early Muslims, long before Columbus, who went up the Mississippi, and they made contact with the native people, and they came in contact with the Iroquois, the Algonquin, and they mixed with the inhabitants of that part of the world. About 12 years ago, a man by the name of Mahir Abdul-Razak, who is a Cherokee Blackfoot, American Indian, but also a Muslim, wrote for a publication known as The Message. And he says, there are Muslims in our group. For the most part, not many people are aware of the Native American contact with Islam, which began over 1,000 years ago. Some of those Muslim travelers who visited us ended up living with our people. For most Muslims and non-Muslims of today, this type of information is unknown, unmentioned in the books of history. Remember that history has always been written in the words of the conqueror. And so correct narratives need to come out to give people their rightful dues in history, their rightful achievements in history. Mahir Abdul-Razak tells us about documents, treaties, legislation, resolutions that were in fact involving Muslims. Treaties such as the Peace and the Friendship Treaty, signed on the Delaware River in 1787, bearing the signature of Abdul Haq and Muhammad ibn Abdullah. These were the names of the Indians, of the chiefs of that time. And they appear on documents. And all of these documents are present in the National Archives, as well as in the Library of Congress. If you have access to records in the state of South Carolina, read the Moore's Sundry Act of 1790, Almost all of the vocabulary of the tribes has something, some name in reference to Allah. Even the names, Mahir Abdul Razak tells us, of the cities that were called Tallahasi, it means that He, Allah, will deliver you sometime in the future. Because we all return to Allah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So the journey of Muslims continued. But because they were unable to establish themselves, because they were not able to keep strong links with the Muslim world, the link with the knowledge, making Islam relevant to the world that they live in, and because of the dominance of slavery to people of color and the discrimination that took place, people's religions, identity, and names was removed completely. People started taking names of their masters, the religion of their masters. That is why we read about the Gala people who ran into the islands of the Carolinas, who did not want to be enslaved, who started those rice plantations. And because of the conditions in those islands that were ideal, tropical, very similar to where they came from Sierra Leone, and they started those rice plantations, even their masters eventually abandoned those regions. Why? Because of the diseases that were there in those tropical climates. And the African Muslims were much more tolerant to those diseases. These stories are untold of. They still live in the rural areas, in the coastal region of these islands. The Gala people, I was at the Smithsonian, and I went to the African Museum. And as we enter, at the reception, there is a lady that is talking to my wife and I. And I noticed she has a heavy accent. With no offense, I have one too. So I asked her, "Where are you from in Africa?" She's a black lady. She said, "No, I'm from the Gala people of the Carolinas." So we know they're still around. They used to be isolated, but we know with tourism and with taking over of development on the beach and the coast, that a lot of their heritage has disappeared. But if you look at their culture and you study the writings about them, it will tell you that in their funerals, they used to prepare a lot of food and they called it sadaqah. Sadaqah. Same thing that West Africans do. Same thing as East Africans. You have a death in the family, you prepare a lot of food. You say this is sadaqah for the mate, for the deceased. Their women names, Maryam, Fatu, Hawa. These were the names of their women. So we know these were Muslim names. East African Muslims have Africanized the Muslim names. Maryam is usually pronounced Maryamu. Fatma is usually pronounced Fatuma, and things like that. These are Africanized version of the Muslim names. It's the same thing in West Africa. You've heard of the Seminoles in Florida. If you haven't heard of the Seminoles in Florida, the black Seminoles are an offshoot of the Gala. They were warrior-like. They built their own settlements in Florida and fought a series of wars to preserve their freedom. They are now scattered in North America, and they were given all sorts of names. Indian Negroes, Seminole Negroes. They were an offshoot of the Gala. One of their warriors and their leader was called Ibrahim. It's on the Yale website, Yale University. You can Google search it. You'll find this information. Historians are saying 18th century Florida, in many ways, is an African frontier. The Gala runaway who became the Seminoles are the only people who were capable of taming the wilderness at that time. Why? They possess knowledge about tropical agriculture, about a way of life that is similar to where they were from in Africa, and that resistance, one more, to tropical diseases. So Muslim and Islam is not foreign to this land. It's It's not foreign at all. It is as much a part of America as the Judeo-Christian faith. Muslims came during the time of the Columbus, and in the second part of this khutbah, where we will talk about this 2 weeks from now, we will talk about those Muslims known as the Moriscos of Spain. Because during the Inquisition, Muslims had to take an identity, and Jewish people had to take an identity to run away from the persecution at that time. The Catholic Inquisition. And Muslims called themselves Moriscos, and the Jews called themselves Morenos of Spain. These were the people who sailed with the Spaniards who came to the Americas. The influence of literacy in Africa and its influence to the Americas is huge. The desert libraries of Africa is a rich heritage, a forgotten heritage. There's an international museum of Muslim culture in Jackson, Mississippi. Yes, Jackson, Mississippi. If you ever travel through Jackson, Mississippi, go to this museum, as small as it is. There's a collection of information and displays there about the influence of West Africans in literacy in this part of the world. Wherever they went, Muslims, somehow they ended up leaving their mark and their legacy. In some cases it was removed. In other cases it was beyond removal. And the evidence speaks for itself. أقول ما تسمعون واستغفر الله لي ولكم فيستغفروه غفور رحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين واحد الأحد الفرد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ومن والاه. My fellow Muslims, we are in the month that is commonly identified in the United States as the Black History Month. It is important that we narrate the story of African scholars that came to this country and the literate people who came willingly or unwillingly, and to show that this country, a lot of Muslims paved the way for it. The millions of Muslims who came. Know that this is part of our legacy, and so it is a legacy that we're proud of as well. So inshallah you will take the interest of learning and exploring this subject further and educating others who may want information about the truth of the matter. عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك تقول ما تسمعون وأقيموا الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون قم إلى صلاتكم. Stand up for prayer.